everybody. Nice to practice with you all. So I was going to say a few words about the spiritual path. In general, I'll say some specific things about Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, but basically what I have to say really is universal in terms of a spiritual path, regardless of what tradition, what religion. So, although I have to say the premise point is actually very Buddhist, which is essentially who we are is primordially pure and good, that our nature is the union of wisdom and compassion. So we're not, there isn't this idea of original sin in Buddhism, which of course in the Christian tradition is being questioned as well by people like Matthew Fox, but rather there's an idea that actually we are awakened beings. There's a timeless purity and goodness to who we really are. And this is likened to gold. But it's the kind of gold like you find in the mountain, and there's like other ores kind of wrapped around it, so it's not always so easy to just see the gold right there. So that's what our experience is likened to, and that the spiritual path is cleaning away the other elements so that the gold can just be there, so that we can experience our pure being, our true nature, our awakened self that was always there from beginning. And yet we couldn't fully experience the freedom, the limitless freedom and joy and peace and happiness that abides at the core of who we truly are, to be able to fully experience that, to fully experience the, the potential of who we are as human beings, which from a Buddhist point of view is limitless, infinite. In full awakening, it's infinite freedom, infinite well-being, happiness, peace, and the capacity to benefit others is all innately there. So the gold was never really tarnished by the ore. It was just kind of, masks, so to speak, and that's likened to how we are. So the spiritual path, how can we come to know who we truly are? So in theistic terms, in a theistic religion, in other words, that's based on God, which basically in the human realm at this point has to do with Judaism, Christian, and Islam, we would call this divine union, coming into divine union. In Buddhism, we call this awakening to your true nature, and the reality of what is, coming to fully realize the reality, the truth of what is. So the practices are to help us uncover this, to bring awareness to what's going on with ourselves and our world. So in the beginning, we need to be able to achieve some kind of mastery over our minds, so that our minds are not just throwing us all over the place. Like the thoughts, a lot of times thoughts will get in certain kinds of pathways and just sort of run their habitual patterns. So we want to be able to be on top of that, so that we're the master of our thoughts, not vice versa. Our thoughts aren't running us around. And so in any spiritual path, really, we need to learn to bring the mind to what's called shamatha in Sanskrit, shine in Tibetan. What we translate basically as calm abiding or concentration. Just bringing the mind to rest, to peace. And this is, takes some practice to be able to do this, so that wherever we are, whatever is happening, we can actually bring our mind to peace. And in our tradition, we do that in a variety of ways, through meditation, such as we are just sharing together, a quiet meditation. But there's also hundreds of other ways to practice, including hundreds of thousands of other types of meditation and physical yogas. A combination with all the physical yogas are combined with meditation. There's, of course, practice of service, of working, benefiting others. Chanting practice. There's meditations that involve a lot of visualization, imagination practice, where you're visualizing whole mandalas of awakened beings, of yourself being in relationship with the awakened beings. Many, many different kinds of practice, and these work on us in different ways. So if we just stick with this gold and ore analogy, the different methods of spiritual practice work on us in different ways and support us in different ways. Help us purify, help us come to calm abiding, help us relate with skillfully habitual patterns, help us liberate those. And the variety of spiritual practice helps us really be in touch on a body level, a heart level, and a mind level altogether. So within Tibetan Buddhism, these three are very much worked with all together. So there's body components, heart components, mind components. And the mind, both in terms of meditation and then also in terms of study. So there's a lot of study that is done on the path too. Particularly, it's called the scholar yogi path, the path of Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. Now, the path of Tibetan Buddhism is also so vast in the skillful means of the variety of kinds of teachings and praxis that people can, in consult with their teacher, but really based on the student's own intuitive sense and what they're drawn to, there's a lot of room to really do whatever kind of practice one is drawn to. What is really calling to one. So although in extensive training programs, there's very particular sets of practices that one goes through, much like in a Catholic training. There's certain different kinds of praxis that are gone through. In Sufism, this is a case. In Taoism, this is a case. In Hinduism, sometimes it's a case, and depending on the teacher and how they're working. But there's one could go into a kind of training program where the whole body of praxis is transmitted to the students, and you go through kind of a very thorough kind of training program. But it's also possible to just, with your teacher, design what is right for the person and follow along in that way. And the vast variety of practices is very rich, and really people can connect with, whatever really, as I was saying, speaks to your own heart. And at the same time, it's possible to just take one practice and do that for our entire life and attain awakening. And same with the scholarly, with the study. It really helps us in studying to really understand how we're placing the mind in meditation, to understand what we're actually doing, why we're meditating, what the point of it is, what the whole underlying premise of Buddhism is, and what all the praxis are pointing to. But at the same time, that's not absolutely necessary either. And there's a famous story of one of the Buddha's disciples that was probably retarded, the way the story is, and he had the job of just sweeping the temple. And but he had really great faith in the Buddha, and he really wanted to practice and awaken as the Buddha was talking, as he was teaching. And so he received the teaching from the Buddha that he should just, when he's sweeping the temple, just think he's sweeping his mind. Just sweeping the mind. And that was his practice, and he attained awakening in that lifetime by just sweeping the temple. And this is, really an awareness practice that he was doing and took him all the way. So there's a lot of room on the spiritual path, particularly in Vajrayana, for individual ways of going about it. At the same time, there's a lot of transmission, empowerments, and this kind of thing, and transmissions of the practices of the teachings. And so there's a kind of a circle between the teacher and the student of a relationship through the process. So in the West, as meditation has become popular, it's become popular because it can help us kind of get a breather from a super busy, chaotic, stressful life, or it can help us deal with intense pain, different kinds of chronic, difficult circumstances. But that's not really the point of Buddhist practice or the point of spiritual practice. It's not really to just make us feel a little better or be more mellow, or even really to be nicer people or to be more at ease. Those are all considered kind of perks. And although we do want to work on character, we want to work, the paramitas are very emphasized in terms of our habitual patterns and how we are, that we want to develop more patience, more loving kindness, generosity, integrity, etc. But at the same time, we're not trying to make ourselves into better people. We're trying to really uncover who and what we actually are. And in awakening, you see this flowering. Everybody's completely unique how they manifest awakening. And my teacher, Kala Rinpoche, I think there's a picture, right here, on the shrine of him in his young form in the middle of this altar, who's now 23, I think. He emphasized that at the core of every religion is awakened mind, and it's awakened mind wanting to communicate to people, and that all traditions are sacred in their essence. So we want to come to be more at peace and ease with ourselves, but to work on our character, to be able to bring ourselves to a much happier, peaceful state of mind. But the purpose is far, far beyond that. It's really to bring ourselves to complete and total liberation, which means that we are no longer at the mercy of phenomena. We're no longer experiencing change, really, between life and death, between having a body and not having a body, between being in a very, very difficult, challenging situation or being in a very peaceful, kind of wonderful situation. Our mind can be liberated, at peace, communicating the qualities of awakened mind, the compassion, the wisdom, regardless of this phenomena of circumstance. So this is what the Buddha was talking about. And I think this really powerful, deep liberation piece, divine union, or whatever we want to call it, is at the heart of all traditions. So then the path is really to uncover that, but not to make ourselves into something we aren't. But it's also not just sort of a temporary fix. We're looking for the permanent, the complete solution, not the temporary solution, to kind of just endure this life for, or kind of try to survive it as best we can, but to be actually completely and fully liberated. So this wisdom that's at the core is in all of us. So I feel like my job as a teacher is to help people connect with their inner wisdom, to help open the channel to that. And that our practice is doing that, to clear away what's in the way so that we connect with our own inner wisdom. And on the way, we have to learn to trust our own knowingness. And we have to learn discernment, to discern. Like say we're picking up something, or say we're sort of wondering about embarking in something and we're not quite sure and we're sensing into this, and maybe a part of us is really saying yes and another part is kind of hesitant. We need to learn to discern what's an emotional reaction, what's a real intuition, like maybe we're really picking up something that could be a problem. So we need to really learn to trust our own knowingness, but really learn to have discernment as well. And discernment is also really important in our lives as human beings in terms of what the Buddhists call skillful means. Being able to deal with our lives skillfully and be of benefit to others. As the mind is brought to more calm abiding, and we try to bring in, patience maybe when we're frustrated, kindness when we're irritated or angry, when we're stingy, bringing in more generosity. When we try to work with ourselves like this, we're coming closer, sort of in a different kind of a way, to who we truly are, to the primordial goodness of who we are. And I actually think that at the core, again, the different spiritual or religious traditions, whether they're an ancient, world religion, or whether it's a newer tradition, any spiritual path that's authentic is very similar in a lot of ways, although it may look different outside. And I think this is why I've been part of, for some years now, something called Contemplative Alliance, and part of an interspirituality movement, which is kind of one step beyond the interfaith, where people that have been practitioners of different religions come together and discuss our experience and share meditations and practices and all this kind of thing. And what happens in every kind of situation I've ever been in throughout my life, these kind of situations, people that are on a spiritual path, really, they connect with each other. It doesn't matter what tradition it is. Because the spiritual path is really about transformation and awakening. And everybody goes through some similar things along the way. And there's territory that we all can recognize. And there's a deep, deep camaraderie. But we all know there's conflict on a religious level, which is probably more about either people getting people incensed so that they'll go to war for them and using religion in order to do that, or it's about dogma. And in Buddhism, we don't really believe in dogma. There is a highly developed, highly sophisticated philosophy, but it's not believed that people should just hear something and believe it because you were told. So we need to investigate in our own experience and come to find out what we know is true inside ourselves. And this is what faith is about in Buddhism too. And there's different ways it's talked about, but you can look at it simply of three kinds of faith, which is also needed on the path. And the first kind of faith is called the faith of inspiration, where maybe, for example, we meet the Dalai Lama, we hear him speak, or we meet some other spiritual person and we're inspired by them. Or we go into some kind of cathedral, temple, whatever, and we're inspired by that. or in nature, we're inspired. Maybe we're in nature and all of a sudden we come into a deep sense of oneness with what is. And that's inspiring for our spiritual path. So this is called like the faith of inspiration that sort of gets us going. And somehow something that we come in contact with touches our heart and inspires us. And it's something really feels right about it. It feels like a direction we want to move in. So we connect with that. Then along the way, we're in this whole exploration of teachings and really coming to see what's really resonating and really exploring them in depth and with a teacher who actually knows the tradition. Because if one really wants to embark on the spiritual path, it can't actually be learned from books. It needs a live relationship. And of course, there are some people who just sort of spontaneously awaken, but this is, most of us need a lot more kind of step-by-step method and practice than that. And in that, then the student-teacher relationship is really, really valuable. So in Vajrayana, we also work with the habitual patterns, the sort of what's translated as conflicting emotions, such as anger, jealousy, hatred, etc., pride, or arrogance. We work with transforming or liberating those into their pure state. So it's said that everything about us that may be unskillful or negative is just like the original pure energy is just like sort of slightly twisted up. So for example, pride, when that energy is worked with and allowed to liberate, turns into what's called the wisdom of equanimity, the wisdom of equality, recognizing in a very deep way the equality of ourself and all sentient beings. So that pride energy actually liberates into that wisdom, and likewise with other kinds of like negative emotional patterns or energetic patterns. So we're working with both kind of, sometimes applying antidotes and sometimes working with a direct transformation of the energy. Applying an antidote would be, like say we're really upset, then we just maybe take some breaths and really calm ourselves down. Or if we're very angry or triggered in a particular way, we might try really contemplating the opposite of that, like loving kindness, patience. So from all these different angles, we work on ourselves, and then at some point or other, usually at various points along the way, we come to really crunch places where we're really up against difficult stuff inside of ourselves. And, in spiritual literature, the ego has gotten kind of, and in some spiritual teaching, the ego has gotten kind of a bad rap. Like the ego's taking all the blame, like kill the ego and everything will be fine. Well, I personally believe that's completely off the mark. First of all, I haven't really seen anybody who's been able to kill it. And the ego is more, I think of it more as like a child that you adopted off the streets that was never really taught all that much. And the ego formulates between about 3 and 6. So its operating system is based on the information it gathered between, 0 and 6 years old. And a lot of that's out of date. So the operating system is still operating on really out of date information. And the ego actually is really trying to help us. It's just a natural part of the psyche as a human being. but it doesn't have all the information, and it usually is fairly untrained, a little bit uncivilized. And, if you think about like adopting a child who never had a family and was just living on the streets, what do they need in order to turn into a happy, satisfied, um, fulfilled, and, valuable, like a beneficial human being? What do they need? Love. They don't need to be beat, right? You're not going to adopt that kid from Romania in the orphanage where they were never touched or something, or somebody off the street, that, like in Africa where there's all these, parentless children. You're not going to adopt them and then just beat them. That's not going to turn them into a good person. You're not going to try to. So my feeling is the ego is really like this. It needs a lot of parenting, you know. And who's the parent? The parent is awareness itself. That's actually the grown-up who could actually be present at home. So I really think the ego is trying to do the best job it can for us. But it just doesn't really know that much of the whole picture. So loving kindness, and a basic shift of identity starts to happen out of ego consciousness into awareness itself. And sometimes these shifts on the spiritual path are like one time years ago, Hamid Ali, who started the Ridwan School, the Diamond Heart School, he was at Spirit Rock giving a teaching. First time I was there, this is a really long time ago, and he said, well, we all go to enlightenment kicking and screaming. And I thought, that is so right. And sometimes, it's almost like we feel like that, like we're kicking and screaming. The ego's like in total rebellion about our spiritual practice. It just wants to do what it wants to do, and that's it. And underneath, usually there's a lot of fear because, of the implications of deep spiritual practice, and the ego's really afraid it's going to be a lot more work or a lot more responsibility, or maybe it's going to get annihilated. It's definitely going to be some sort of big problem. So the ego, often will have a lot of resistance. So it takes, a lot of loving kindness, I think, to work on the spiritual practice. And I think the loving kindness for the self and for others is like the salve, like the oil for the spiritual path that makes everything possible, that makes the journey possible, that makes it enjoyable. A lot of times, when we first come to meditation or something, we think you have to like discipline yourself really hard, and we're like a stern taskmaster, and most people know that doesn't really work. The ego will totally rebel. And a kind of stern toughness, sometimes it works for a while and, can get us a certain ways for sure, but sooner or later it's not going to fully make it. And then we really have to turn more to loving kindness. So I would say the one other thing about the spiritual path that I do feel there's nothing more rewarding, because I do feel whatever work we do on the spiritual path, and I see this at Sukhasiddhi, helps us bloom, helps us blossom fully into who we are as unique individual beings. And so whatever the hardships we go through, whatever struggles we face with ourselves, whichever, sort of shadowy parts of ourselves we have to face and take responsibility for, the hard work of kind of working to release patterns or to change patterns that we feel are harmful, and all of that. I think, all of that serves to bring us more to peace, more to a sense of well-being, and further along the way where we're really able to be of benefit to others and to ourselves. So as far as we can go in this life is really good. And then whatever else we want to do with this life is empowered through this blossoming. Because the more the ore falls away and the gold is just radiantly there, anything and everything that we are interested in this life, as we turn our attention to that and engage with that, we can bring that to fruition. And I think, as you know, in Course in Buddhism, there's a teaching about that we're having, various lives. It isn't just one life, this life, but that we've had lives before, we probably will in the future. And whether or not, we believe in that doesn't really matter. As I said, in Buddhism, it's not a question of trying to believe in something. It's just a question of what we come to know as true. And we'll come to know things as true in their own time, whenever is right for us. So it doesn't matter whether we believe that or not. But from my experience, I actually do believe that, because as a small child, I remembered past lives. So it wasn't ever a question. I didn't know we weren't supposed to have them or whatever. And nobody ever talked about it. And I certainly never talked about it. So I just always thought they were there. But I think my experience is that the work we do in one life carries on to the next, as well as we may have to face and learn things about ways we were doing things that were not so good, but also whatever effort we do put in continues with us. As we work in this way, the ego becomes more and more translucent to pure being, to awakened being. So I don't think the ego really goes away. It's just part of being a human being, like our arms and legs. But it becomes translucent, and it doesn't have to be the little kid running the universe, with this huge load upon its shoulders. The ego can more like relax, kind of be the assistant. Like you let your kid sit in the captain chair on the ship and sort of have fun, but it doesn't have to feel like it's responsible for everything. And then as the ego relaxes and is more and more translucent, the suchness, what's called dharmata in Sanskrit, our true nature, our true being, can just be there. And then we're really, really able to be of a lot of benefit for ourselves and others. So that's what I want to share with you all tonight.